The Warren Commission, basing its findings on the earlier F.B.I. report, at first said 2 bullets had hit Kennedy, 1 in the back, 1 in the head, and 1 bullet had hit Governor Connolly. Their conclusions were thrown into disarray by eyewitness James Tate.
I was standing right at the east end of the triple underpass on the sidewalk between Main and Commerce. And when the first shot, which I thought was a firecracker, happened and I heard 2 more, I ducked behind the triple underpass and actually did not see too much of what was going on until I looked out and the presidential limousine was going right by me under the underpass. At that time, Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters said, "You have blood on your cheek." I reached up and there was a couple drops of blood. And at that time, I remembered something had stung me during the shooting. He says, "Where were you standing?" We walked back, and from about 40 feet away, we noticed a mark on the curb, a very fresh mark. They did not want a missed shot. It would not fit, and my testimony would prove that there was one missed shot that went over the limousine and hit the curb beside where I was standing. It did change the outcome of the Warren report.
So late in the day, the commission were left with only 2 bullets to cause all the wounds to both Kennedy and Connolly, and one of those bullets had to have injured both men. To explain this, Arlen Specter, a counselor to the commission, created the single bullet theory, known to critics as the magic bullet.
The infamous magic bullet. We have that bullet exiting from President Kennedy's neck, moving forward and leftward and downward. It now stops in midair, it turns to the right, it comes back a full 18 inches, stops again, and then slams into John Connolly's back. It continues downward, and it goes through his wrist, and somehow they get that right wrist over to the left thigh. If you look at the Zapruder film, you'll see in the individual frames that John Connolly's right wrist is not near John Connolly's left thigh. The significance of this, the importance, cannot be exaggerated. It is impossible to overstate it. Why? Because the single bullet theory is the sine qua non of the Warren Commission report. It's not a matter of how much weight and credibility do you give to it. It's a matter of whether or not you have a single bullet theory that permits you to conclude that there was only one person firing, whether it was Oswald or anybody else in the world. If you don't have a single bullet theory, then you cannot have a sole assassin. And if you move to that point, then you're into conspiracy by definition. And that's why it had to stop with Oswald as a sole assassin. And that's why they came up with the single bullet theory.
A, quote, pristine bullet had been found on a stretcher in Dallas. This is that single bullet, Warren Commission Exhibit 399. To many, it is known as the pristine bullet. Over the last 40 years, no part of the Warren Commission's 26-volume report has been scrutinized and criticized more than the single bullet theory and how Arlen Specter devised it.
Well, the first speculation was from the F.B.I. and Secret Service reports that there were 3 bullets, and the first one hit the president in the back of the neck, and the second one hit the governor, and the third one hit the president in the back of the head.
That's not my report.
FBI agent Francis O'Neill took notes at the autopsy and says investigators were mistaken from the very beginning.
My report said nothing about the first one hitting him in the neck whatsoever. I don't know where he got that from.
Agent O'Neill's report states that the first bullet wound to the president struck below the shoulder and 2 inches to the right of the spinal column. The autopsy photo confirms this. But Specter didn't get to see the photos. He had to use drawings prepared under the direction of Commander Humes 4 months after the autopsy. Surprisingly, even Humes didn't get to see the photographs. The drawings were based on his memory.
Any investigator would want to see the photos and the x-rays, and the commission did not have them out of deference to the Kennedy family, but I thought that was a major mistake.
Prophetically, in April of 1964, Specter wrote this memo, quote, "Someday someone may compare the films with the artist's drawings and find a significant error."
Now, the single bullet theory has that bullet entering Kennedy. It has an upward angle of 11 to 12 degrees. His arms are up to his throat. His wife is looking at him. Clearly, she is aware that something has happened. Somehow, when the bullet came out of the president's neck, slightly upward, it proceeded over to the right and somewhat downward. In order for Connally to be hit behind the right armpit, that bullet had to have come back over somehow, stopped and turned, and then come in to Connally's right posterior armpit area. Went through the right lung. It shattered 4 inches of this right fifth rib. It came out, went into the back of the governor's wrist. This man, at this point, has been shot through the chest. The wrist has been shattered. He continues to hold his hat, and then it exited from the front of the governor's wrist, and it came down, and it hit the left femur, and somehow bounced back out through the same hole in the skin onto the stretcher. Well, that's the story of the Warren Commission report.
Because 3 empty bullet shells were found on the 6th floor in the so-called sniper's nest, and because of the maximum time of the shooting as shown in the Zapruder film, the Warren Commission report stated that 3 and only 3 shots were fired, that all of the shots came from the same window on the easternmost end of the Texas School Book Depository on the 6th floor, and that all of the shots were fired from the same weapon, a Mannlicher Carcano rifle. The commission concluded that either the first or the second shot struck the president from behind. They hypothesized that the bullet passed through his body and went on to strike Governor Connally in the back. The bullet then went through the governor, exiting his chest, flew on to strike his right wrist, and eventually buried itself in his left thigh. 2 days after the assassination, Time Incorporated Life magazine bought the original film that Abraham Zapruder took of the assassination. This is the opening sequence of the film. The president is now looking to his left and waving to the crowd. Then, something occurred that caught the attention of both President Kennedy and Governor Connally. The first shot was fired at exactly this point. He's turned his head 90 degrees and was now looking toward the grassy knoll, and he stopped waving. The president was startled by the sound of the shot. Governor Connally, according to his testimony, immediately realized that the sound was a gunshot. He started to turn to his right, exactly as he has testified. This is what the government and the Warren Commission did not want us to see. The president turned his head towards the knoll in response to the first shot. Abraham Zapruder flinched, and the film jiggles as the sound of the first shot reaches his ear. Nobody in the so-called Oswald window could have even seen the president until nearly 4 seconds later because of the live oak tree on Elm Street blocking the view from the depository. A shot was fired at this point, as proven by the Zapruder film. This means that neither Oswald nor anyone else could have fired that shot from the depository window. This becomes extremely critical because the president starts to wave after that first shot, proving that the shot missed. This is a shot that was ignored by the Warren Commission. This was a bullet that they could not and cannot account for. The car then proceeded down Elm Street and approached the Stemmons Freeway road sign. The president waved to the crowd one last time. Governor Connally was still looking to his right. A second shot was fired from the front, which struck the president in the throat. He responded and his arm started to drop. Governor Connally starts turning to his left. Upon emerging from behind the road sign, the president already displayed distress. Governor Connally did not show any distress until just after he emerged. The governor was holding a Western-style broad-brimmed hat in his right hand. During the shooting, his wrist was shattered. The tendon to the right thumb was severed. Governor Connally could not have held his hat or anything else without the use of this tendon. Although both men have been hit and have responded to it, Governor Connally's right wrist shows no evidence of damage up to now. Not a single drop of blood appears on his right cuff, and he still holds his hat in his hand, indicating that yet another shot at some time past this point struck the governor's right wrist. This would require an additional bullet that the Warren Commission and the government could not account for, allowing for a separate wrist shot.